Hi, I'm Julianne Inarelli. Welcome to this special edition of eNewsline Live. Typically, John Fernandes, President and CEO of AACSB International, conducts the interviews. Today, however, it is my pleasure to pose your questions about organizational leadership to John. We'll explore the experiences and insights that John has acquired over a career spanning more than 4 decades in the private and global nonprofit sectors, and we'll pay particular attention to his 15 years at the helm of AACSB. In that time, AACSB has undergone several significant changes, including changes in governance, global orientation, location, staffing, and its service portfolio. We'll dig into these changes and also John's thoughts about the future of the organization and management education. We welcome our global membership and viewing audience to this conversation. And John, welcome to the special edition of eNewsline Live.
Well, thank you, Julianne, and thank you all for tuning in to listen to AACSB's story. I think it particularly applies to associations, which are bountiful in number, so much more so than we even imagine, but also to small businesses, to family businesses. I think they could go through very similar stages of development. And then for all of you history buffs on AACSB, this is your show. So thank you, Julianne. I look forward to this discussion.
As do I. Thank you. I want to start by going back in time. Prior to coming to AACSB, you served as Executive Vice President and Chief Operating Officer at the Institute of Internal Auditors. But you were hired at AACSB as the organization's first Chief Executive Officer, a position that hadn't existed before. And you've explained to me in the past that this had to do with a board decision to move towards a model of policy governance. Can you tell me and our audience a bit more about what it was like to come into a new position as a new person and implement this change towards policy governance?
Well, it sounds like a yawner, but actually policy governance is quite exciting. At its core, it means running the organization like a business. And I do think that we had some issues with running it more like an academic institution than like a business when I came to AACSB. But the board saw that, and it converted to this model. And what policy governance essentially does is it causes the board to be the strategic thinking arm of the organization, to focus on the mission, the strategic direction, the overarching goals, and then it's staff's responsibility to deliver. It's a natural evolution for associations. Associations normally start with a few committed volunteers that simply do the work of the association. At some point, they begin to hire staff, full-time staff. But then the organization hits a point where it really needs to grow its service. It needs to grow its membership. What caused me to be intrigued by the job and turned out to be the reality was that the form of governance, policy governance, gives a lot of leeway to the CEO to succeed, to develop your own skills. Mm-hmm. So I think if you're interested in an organization that follows that model and becoming the CEO, you're going to have a maximum opportunity to develop.
And for you at that point in time, your priorities were what? What was it that the board specifically charged you with? Globalization?
It did. The board said, we want to do 2 things, John. They actually said a third, but they said, we want to go global. It's really important. It hadn't been that long since EFMD had launched EQUIS, and EQUIS was launched primarily because AACSB was reluctant to go global. And we needed this quality assurance, quality improvements mechanism beyond the United States. The other thing was domestic members were also a bit, I won't say perturbed, but they didn't feel satisfied with their service. They thought of AACSB as being more of a tax. We accredited every 10 years and we had very few services. So they wanted significant increases in services. So that's what the board said to me was go global, increase services. Now, the one that we might talk about a bit later in more depth is at the same time they said to me, John, we don't think you can do it in your current location, your current staff. And I said to them, I said, well, that's something that I can't sign up to do. I really believe in going global. I had done it with the CIA, exam at IA, and increasing services, excellent, that's wonderful. But relocating the organization was something that I knew would cause a significant loss in staffing to somebody that was brand new. So at the time, I said, I won't come if relocation's on the table. But I knew the second day I was at AACSB, I called for the lease because I knew the time we had to turn it around and really make the organization hum.
You know, I saw a letter that was distributed in 2000 to the AACSB membership announcing your hire. And the letter cited the board's opinion that you had creative ideas about associations of the future. And I can imagine going into a long-standing organization with a lot of tradition, that creative ideas can sometimes not be so welcome. And I wonder if you could talk about how you managed that transition.
Well, creative ideas, yes, I had creative ideas at that point. The organization was a bit slow in its development. Now you might say some of my ideas are scary, so I think that changes over time. One of the things that was most important in getting started in a new position with new people, I think, is to take a survey of the intentions that the organization has. So what I did was I put together a bunch of survey questions that I asked the board and I asked the staff, and one of them was particularly important. It said, knowing that we wanted to make these changes, it said to the staff, how much do you think AACSB needs to change to fulfill the objectives of the board? And the staff rated very highly, 3.8 on a 4.0 scale. That's really high. But then I asked a follow-on question, how much do you yourself need to change? That was about 2.0. So when I presented the results to the staff, I said, what you're telling me is that the organization needs to change, but you yourself do not have to, but the person next to you does. And Juliette and some gave me a nod that was true. So I knew I had some difficulty with the need to change culture in the organization. And we're here now, so things have gone well.
Mm-hmm. They have. I think many of us watching would agree with that. But I think organizational change at an organization like AACSB goes beyond simply the staff. AACSB is powered by a very wide network of volunteers. We have many committees and a board, obviously. How do you impact culture change in that broader environment beyond just the staff?
Yeah. Well, as you said, your volunteers are the lifeblood of the organization. Without them, the association doesn't exist. There is no mission. They're volunteers, so they're going to change when they want to change, when they agree. So that process of collaboration to reach alignment on the mission, on the approach to the mission, even the general scope of initiatives, it's very important that you get that buy-in, not just with your board, but throughout the organization. So the way you usher cultural change through your organization is first with your volunteers, and that has to do with buy-in. The way you do it with staff is a little more controllable. I think that you make sure that people are aligned with the new mission, and that we did have. You measure people based on their performance, and you make sure that they're in fact following what the organization is intending. And I think that can be in some ways more difficult, and in some ways it's more controllable because they're with you every day and you can set the example and set the expectations. So but cultural change should be taken rather slowly, rather deliberately. And as you know, I'm not one that likes slow and deliberate, but changing culture really lends itself to making sure it endures and not trying to force a cultural change.
Now, you've mentioned the relocation. Obviously, that's a major decision for any organization, and one that can have a big impact on not just the organization itself, but also its people. Why the move? Why take such a big decision and disrupt so many lives in the process?
Well, let's talk about that from the standpoint of the organization, because you're right. The organization had set upon a global mission and expanding services. And we did try to make that happen, and we had some level of success in St. Louis. But we had a couple of things going against us. St. Louis is a great city, but it's a traditional city with not what I would say at the time a global mindset. It also had a difficult climate. We were trying to go global, and the bottom line was it wasn't an especially attractive location to bring in international members, nor was it that accessible. In the year of the relocation, we lost 60% of our flights at Lambert St. Louis Airport. So that encouraged us to relocate too. But the main meaning of the reason for the relocation was that we needed to better achieve our mission, and we needed to better achieve our overarching goals. And that meant globalization, and it wasn't the right location for that.
So what was it about Tampa that made this such an attractive location?
Well, I think we have to start a little bit earlier in the story when we decided there was a need to examine where we should be best. It was because our lease was running out, and we looked at 22 North American cities, and as you know, we got down to 5 and then eventually Tampa. What was interesting though, and I think this is important for associations, is when you relocate, it has to be to further the mission, and it has to be cost neutral. The members don't want to pay extra for you to be in a different city. You better have the revenue stream. So that knocked out all the likely soldiers of Chicago and New York and Los Angeles and Boston and New York. Way too expensive. We figured if we moved to Chicago, which had great air service, we'd have to increase employee salaries tremendously because the cost of real estate was 70% higher. So it just like a Ouija board, it pointed to the southeast where costs are lower. And the final 5 were, in addition to St. Louis, 4 other cities: Atlanta, Tampa, Orlando, and Miami. And you'd say, well, how did Miami get in there? Well, that was probably the strength of one board member that thought Miami should be in the hunt. But in the end, it came down to Tampa and Orlando, and they profiled exactly the same. Now, half of this decision is cost, and then the other half was 5 variables, including quality of life, ability to attract talent, labor force, the types of things that are more qualitative. And Tampa and Orlando, on paper, sitting in St. Louis, with all the help we got from Cushman & Wakefield, looked identical. But they weren't. In the end, Tampa was a resounding winner. I don't think Atlanta got a vote. Not Atlanta, Orlando. The reason being was that Tampa offered the best pitch on how it would support AACSB's global development. From the mayor to all involved, the president of USF, of the University of Tampa, the chief of police, the head of the school district, all came out to make sure we chose Tampa. They saw our value proposition as being the center for business schools, which other cities didn't see. So they beat Orlando rather handily. I will tell you that the location and the availability of a hotel next to our education center was important. We were building that brand new. But it really was the effort of the mayor and the EDC and the business community. It showed us that it worked very well together and that they would support us.
You know, some might say that you've returned the favor to the city of Tampa in the level of involvement that you've had locally and in the degree to which you've encouraged your employees to give back and become involved in the community. Could you talk a little bit about the degree to which becoming involved in the local community is important for an organization that's global like AACSB?
One of the sadnesses that I had upon leaving St. Louis, you implied about the human toll. That was the toughest thing on me. But I felt a sadness towards the city because I don't think that we were good corporate citizens. We did not participate in anything to do with the city. The city hardly knew that we existed. When we came to Tampa, we were determined to right that ship. We were going to be in the middle of the downtown area, the business district. We were going to get involved, and we were going to hire people that weren't just 8-to-5ers that would go beyond that. And that we did. And in fact, one of the most surprising things to me was the dedication of our people. We've been extremely fortunate and diligent to have that. But a company must give back. A sustainable organization must think about sustaining society, make their communities better. And associations are well positioned to do that. And they can hire individuals that follow along with the mission of the organization that tend to be more predisposed to being corporate citizens. So I think it's absolutely essential to be a good corporate citizen, and I applaud our staff for what they're involved with and continue to be.
Mm-hmm. You know, speaking of hiring, when the association made the move to Tampa, there must have been some extremely mixed emotions among the staff that chose to make the move with the organization. They probably were looking at the crop of newcomers coming in and experiencing a good deal of uncertainty about the future of the organization, given the high turnover of the staff. What sorts of risk management strategies did you and AACSB put into place to help mitigate the risks of a radical move?
Yes. Well, we were very serious about it, and I'll say that originally one of the concerns I had about relocation was the risk of sustaining operations. When I mentioned about you lose 80% of the staff, that in fact we did, but we wanted to restructure at the same time. We identified 25 risk management strategies, and what we did was assign these risks and discuss strategies with 5 people that were relocating that were more senior in the organization. One of the greatest risks was not operational. The greatest risk was that the staff that was not going along stayed very long, right up to the relocation, and they simply felt that it wasn't going to happen. And they put a lot of pressure on the volunteer leadership and committees to essentially stop the relocation. I'll give you one risk management strategy, a very simple one. That was the year that over the summer, I called each and every one of the new board members and explained the situation to them, explained the things that we were doing. Everyone was on high alert to cross their lines of responsibility, to try and make sure that we didn't have morale issues. And even though it was very difficult, particularly for the new staff going to St. Louis to learn, it still was very successful. One person said to me that he couldn't understand how we relocated because he never noticed a downtime. The headquarters is where the server is, and the server was down for just 28 hours and at the time. And he said that the operations, in his viewpoint, actually improved during the year of move with a complete 80% changeover in staff. That was a testament to the quality of people that we hired and continue to hire.
Well, and also to the ability of you and the other organizational leaders to pull everyone together and get a bunch of newcomers on the same page. And the commitment that those that moved to Tampa gave towards catching everyone else up to speed.
Everybody had to do their job, that's right.
You know, I remember from that time the amount of energy within the organization. It almost felt like a startup. And I think in many ways that level of energy has stayed with the organization and with its employees. How how did you, as the Chief Executive Officer, help to maintain that level of innovation and can-do spirit that is present in a startup throughout the following decade?
Well, let me say this, and I say this to all our employees, anyone that comes to interview, is that in your adult life, most of the time you'll spend working, unfortunately. The next most is probably sleeping. And when you look at your actual leisure time, it becomes very limited. You have to enjoy what you do. If you don't enjoy what you do for work, then you shouldn't be doing it. Find something else. So we simply try to hire individuals and keep them focused on the spirit of the mission. This mission is never ending. I mean, we envision where we like to be at times, and we take stock at when we've achieved that. But our mission is ongoing, and it's advancing quality management education worldwide through accreditation, thought leadership, and value-added services. But that point of advancing management education worldwide is still a vital mission. It drives vital programs and services, and that drives the vitality of a group of employees that are strongly committed to that mission. It also drives the vitality of the volunteers. It's challenging now. Higher education's in a challenging position, but AACSB is still well positioned with strong volunteers, strong allegiance, and a commitment to advancing quality management education worldwide.
So I want to go back to one of the discussion points earlier on, globalization. How would you characterize AACSB's efforts to date with regard to globalization and our progress? Where are the organization's biggest remaining opportunities in that regard?
Well, how would I characterize it now?
Mm-hmm.
Well, this is a self-assessment, so excellent on all our parts. We did a great job. Well, let's put it back to the numbers a bit. In 1999, 15 years ago, AACSB had 10 schools that were accredited outside the U.S. We had close to 15% members, maybe it might be a little high on that were outside the U.S., but it was a U.S.-centric organization. U.S. services, if you wanted to be a member, it was still U.S. And it set this desire to go global. Now we have 207 schools that are accredited in some 48 countries. To put that in perspective, I'm not talking about U.S. schools, but international schools, 207. It took us 15 years or so to get to 207. It took AACSB from 1916 until 1979 to get to 207 schools. So our growth has been very rapid, and it hasn't always been culturally compatible with our standards. We changed to Mode 3 and again in 13, which facilitate globalization. So I think, given the nature of our business, given the single country dominance, that our globalization threshold that we've attained is excellent. Now, you ask, but what's left to do? Well, we've only just begun. There are 16,000 business schools in the world. Most of the students that are coming about in large numbers are in emerging economies. Our developed economies, Western Europe, is in a decline of college-age students, and the US is peaking. So let's think about it. Most of the students that are going to be available for future schools are coming out of emerging areas, with schools that don't always have, in fact, almost always don't have the resources to manage the volume. Education is the great enabler, and we have a strong role to play, but it's very important that we bridge the collaboration gap between schools that are in the developed economies and schools that are the emerging economies. I sincerely believe that the solutions to the challenges of each rest with each other. They rest with collaboration. But I think that's something that we still have to model right. That we have to make the value proposition, and we have to take a much greater lead in facilitating collaborations, not of the high brand schools that everybody knows that already do it, but of the schools that aren't high brands that are delivering quality management education that need a broader market, or schools that are emerging that are doing the best they can, but they don't have the faculties as structured as they do in the Western world. But we have to help these schools, and they will help us, and that will make the world of management education successful for another 100 years.
That would be great to see. And I want to come back to your vision for the future as we're wrapping up this interview. But for now, I'm wondering, for many organizations that are looking at globalizing, they're probably wrestling with this question of whether or not they should open up a new office in another world location. And I wonder what your perspective is as to what the indicators are that an organization like AACSB is ready to carry on the establishment of infrastructure, offices, staff in other parts of the world.
Well, let's start first with the human element. It does require a sophistication and an achievement of a managerial acumen to be able to manage that expansion. But what drives it is the need from the members. And you get to a point in your globalization where the central headquarters can't effectively serve all of its members. And that results in turnover, dissatisfied members. If you really believe in the mission of the organization, you have to believe in service. In our case, we chose as our first international office Singapore, another good selection process. But we chose Singapore as being at a central point in Asia, which we found had 6,000 business schools. That's just Asia, not the Asia Pacific. I don't know how many have done this trip, but some of you have. From Tampa to Singapore is really a tough one. And trying to sustain service levels in that region was very difficult, very trying, and it was episodic. We were doing the best we were able to do, but not effectively. So we needed to put an office there. And that office has done very well, particularly in increasing accreditation and providing professional development. Now we're opening an office in Amsterdam. One of the benefits of opening an office in a central point like Amsterdam, obviously, is to be where our second greatest core of accredited schools members are, and that's Europe. But it's a great point of contact for Eastern Europe, the Middle East, and Africa. So it's a very diverse region, but our idea is that Amsterdam can serve the Europe, Middle East, and Africa. There's kind of a logic element that sits in between all this. It's time zones. Tampa's 12 hours from Singapore, Asia. That wasn't very doable from a communication standpoint. It was 6 hours from Europe. Could be done. But when we have offices in Singapore, Tampa, and Amsterdam, any member in the world can contact an AACSB office on their own workday. It's very important. But I do think, without getting into strategy too much, because I think it'll elongate the conversation, you do have to be flexible in the different regions. And it's based on stage of development, culture, the differentiation. The United States is a giant, homogenous country. I know Texans wouldn't say that about us Red Sox fans, but the bottom line is it's fairly homogenous, but it's not that way. And Europe is not homogenous, very heterogeneous. And when we go beyond that, it's more so. And Asia would say the same thing. It's not homogenous. So you have to make sure that you're serving in the manner in which that particular culture and that school expects and is used to being served.
A lot of learning as we go. And speaking of that, you've moved the organization into new and unfamiliar territory in many ways, literally through the relocation, but figuratively through the global expansion and through development of new services, the culture shift that you described earlier. How do you build trust among AACSB staff and stakeholders in you as a leader during this kind of transition?
Well, it's kind of you to put it in those terms, but it does make the centricity of leadership more pointed than it really is. It's all of us. It's all of our wonderful volunteers and staff and members. Everyone gives an inch and then goes a mile for you. Building trust from the volunteer member standpoint is really predicated upon agreeing what is to be done and then doing it. Now, there's an old term when I was in school called zero defects. Nobody expects zero defects. But the more reliable you are on outcomes and the closer you get to being 100% delivering, the more the trust comes about from your volunteer structure, your investors, your owners. That's where their trust comes from. Reliability, performance, that meets their expectations. Staff is somewhat different. Yes, reliability. They want to make sure they're paid and they're supported well. But you have to have fair treatment, equitable treatment of staff. Even though you've got a structure, you always have a structure to have to work within. One thing that I just say to associations: no layoffs. Layoffs are bad. Layoffs ruin organizational loyalty. Now, if you have situations in which there's an incompatible organization need with a skill set, and it's a change of position direction on a one-off basis, you've got to do that. And organizations continue to improve. But don't do layoffs. Do anything but. And that gives your staff the belief that their job is a stable point in their lives, and it's a good place to be, and it is an important extended family. Celebrate anything you can and create new celebrations for things that you don't. Make sure you bring your staff together to interact with each other very regularly. And obviously, hire the best possible people that you can, then retain them. Do everything you can to retain them. Yes, that means raises, that means promotions, and that means a good place to work. If you make it such, you'll have an incredible staff, one that I think AACSB staff, and I've said this many times, is the best staff of an association I've seen in the world. And I'd put it up against many high-paid corporations. It is a great place to work.
I'd agree with that. Thank you. I had alluded earlier to wanting to come back to your vision for the future, and I want to make sure we get to that before answering some questions from the audience. So, we're at a point in time where higher education in general is in the midst of a good deal of uncertainty. Paint for us a picture of your vision for a prosperous future for management education and business schools, as well as AACSB.
Yeah, see, here's where the risk of John's creative ideas comes into John's scary ideas. This is my opinion and doesn't represent AACSB's, but we've operated in higher education pretty much the same way for 1,000 years. It is a sturdy institution, and it is still a sturdy institution. It gives to people the opportunity to maximize their potential. So it is a wonderful asset for humankind. However, society wants all that more too. Society wants cost effectiveness. They want to spread their resources over a broader pie. And education takes a good bite out of the pie. So we as business schools and business school associations have to put together frameworks that allow for quality education in a much more cost-competitive market. So that's where the scary ideas come. What I'm saying is the institutions have to change their traditions. It's very hard. Very strong faculties that have done a wonderful job, but now we're going to have to make things a little more cost effective with the cost of student debt. So one example is that we're going to have to use our academic faculty in a much more judicious manner, with more teaching professionals that are a lot lower cost to lower that cost of education to the buyer, to the student, and others. But we have to keep high quality management education. And the way we do that is we've got to live and breathe assurance of learning. And we've got to enable technology to help us. And that can help us in many ways, both in delivery, in assessment, in continuous learning, in marketing. Technology is going to be very, very important. Underscore that with the preferences of the millennials. And we're going to have to change. What's worked for the last 1,000 years won't work for the next 1,000 years. We're some of the brightest people on earth. We can make it work, but we've got to change traditions, and we're going to have to be creative. And then I think AACSB, and particularly business schools, are strong for many, many years to come. So economies are fueled by growing businesses, the entrepreneur. And those entrepreneurs are guided by strong management education. So it's a bright future, but we're going to go through some changes now that I know all of you feel.
Looking forward to seeing what lies ahead for AACSB in that new world. I want to move to audience questions. We had a couple submitted prior to the broadcast.
Yes.
The first is about the strength of an organization through its employees. Many know that without good employees, the strength of an organization and the ability of a CEO to implement his or her vision is quite limited. How would you say that organizations can better attract more qualified individuals in the first place, and then implement effective development and retention policies?
Yes, my first thought when you say that is to think people, and then being one of association, I start hearing Barbra Streisand sing, "I promise I won't sing." But people are the essence of what makes things happen. It's things you've heard me say before, but with good people and good plans, anything is achievable. But if you have a choice between the two, pick the good people, because good people will make good plans. Your efforts at hiring are where you should put all of your energies when the time comes. An unproved theorem of mine is that as a manager, 90% of my own personal performance is determined the day you walk through the door. Even though I can help you and mentor you and guide you, coming in with that natural rightness to the mission and capacities is critical. So having good assessments of job skills, and as we do, we have also an assessment of fit. We have a questionnaire which gives us a predictor that an individual coming to the organization will be of a win-win personality. They will be team players. We score for that. And if you fall outside those bars, we get a little concerned, because we want to make sure that we're bringing in people that are going to be part of a great team and great professionals. Everybody makes a mistake, both on the hiring side and the acceptance of employment side. But you just keep working to make it better and better. And I'd ask you, as someone long ago said, are you better off today than you were 10 years ago? And I'll let you answer that, Julianne, but I mean that in the form of people.
Oh, definitely. Definitely, without a doubt. Not just because of what the organization has invested in me, but because of what I've learned from being surrounded by others who were great hires, like you said.
So pay attention to the hiring. And Julianne's a wonderful example of paying attention to your hiring and not to let that great one go someplace else.
Thank you for that. Next question has to do with upper middle management. The question is how upper middle management can work to help change the dynamic, when needed, of upper management in order to move the organization to be more productive?
Yes. Well, I think that that says that upper management is at odds. And we have that one time here. I'm not ashamed to admit that. The first thing I would do is I would hope that the CEO had an open door policy, and I would find a quiet time to tell the CEO what the concerns are. Absent that, either desire or opportunity, having a strong human resources function is critical. The first hire that I made, and I told the board on my 5th day, was that I was going to hire someone in charge of human resources. I can tell you they were not impressed. That was what they thought would be my first hire. But it was very important because the organization has to have confidence in its human resources director or officer. Let them know. They have a good way of finding out what the issues are and getting to the CEO's ear. Now, what's the solution? A solution that's non-threatening is bringing the individuals together, the upper middle and the upper management, if that's the way you want to divide it, and reconfirming the mission of the organization and the commitment. It'll begin to spawn discussions and seeing where we have more likeness than differences. And there is an opportunity there for some benefit to effective performance. I think those should be facilitated with skill, particularly if you have personality issues. We can't expect that everybody likes everyone, and the skilled facilitator is necessary. But that's a very common practical problem at all levels. Open door to the CEO, talk to HR. Hopefully the CEO knows, let's try to find some form of facilitation that shows how we're more together than we are apart.
Yeah. Good advice that hopefully will resonate with the person who asked that question and many others. Our next question has to do with cost effectiveness in the type of transitions that we've experienced. The question is that globalization, relocation, and expansion are all very important but costly endeavors. So how do organizations plan or strategize in order to make these changes in a cost-effective and profit-producing manner?
Yeah, it means not muddling through. It means, right or wrong, setting your plan for the globalization, the relocation, or any significant initiative. And an important part of that plan is the financial feasibility and how you measure your progress in program results as well as finances. We do a very good job on both of those areas. We have extremely disciplined people that plan strategically, and then extremely disciplined people that watch the financial numbers to make sure we get there, as you know. So I think there's no substitute for serious planning, proceeding in accordance with the plan, adjusting, and measuring your performance and financial achievement. One thing that's a myth of the past, we used to set these 5-year strategic plans years ago when I was in my younger days, and if you veer from the strategic plan, it was, oh, why did you veer from the strategic plan? Don't think of strategic planning like that anymore. If your plan isn't changing, if it's not a live document, it's your ticket to obsolescence. What did Jack Welch say? If the rate of change external to the organization exceeds the rate of change within, the end is near. So keep that strategic plan alive, but keep it accurate and measure against it. Meet your expectations, and anything you do, you can be successful at it.
Great. You know, the next question has to do with your background again, and I think it's particularly interesting given that we're at a CEO transition point once again. The question is that coming in, you didn't have a lot of professional experience with management education. So what was it that intrigued you about AACSB and led you to apply for the CEO position?
Sure. Well, the one thing that you probably don't know about me is that I was an academic wannabe. When I was in my senior year of Babson College, I had lots of offers and didn't take them in a year in which there were significant financial difficulties, 74, 75. And My faculty advisor asked me to, would you please take an offer? Other people want offers and you're holding them up. And I said, well, I'm not sure which one to take. And he said, well, what do you really want to do? He says, I want to do exactly what you do. I said, well, that's no trouble. We'll send you to UMass Amherst. You'll be back here in 3 years. I think he was thinking ABD, and you'll be fine. And I said, I don't know. I think I need to get some experience. Well, what happens? Yes, you get some experience, you earn money, and you have a family, and life goes on, and that academic dream goes away. So I never really got to be the academic that I wanted to be. What I did was, as early as the early 1980s, I worked with the Institute of Internal Auditors Houston chapter in starting internal auditing education at the University of Houston and other places, but particularly at UH. I went to work at IA from a big job in New York City Transit as manager of academic relations, working with schools, but I really went to try and get my PhD, and that didn't work out. That's a long story. I went back up the professional ladder to COO, but when AACSB came calling and they said, we want to go global and we want to increase services, I mean, that was like, remember, I'm from Massachusetts, that was like all you could eat Maine lobster. It was lovely for me, and I couldn't pass it up. And I always lamented not being an academic, but many have said, John, look, from when you would have started to be an academic, you would have never been able to have the impact or the enjoyment that you've had at this role. I think as an academic, it's better to start younger. It doesn't have to be 25, but I was going to be starting at 40, and that's a long time.
Mm-hmm. Last question, one more from our audience, and the question is whether or not the rules of organizational culture are the same within academia as they are beyond the walls of academia. And this person writes, for instance, many faculty are drawn to the academic world, assuming some freedom from organizational culture. What's your take on that?
Well, I think that's probably true, but they're not. No, the cultures are not the same at all. Your faculty are independent thought leaders that contribute, are the main cog of product delivery. So they're very, very, very important stakeholders. When you work in an organization, you're part of a team, and every team is an important piece that's interlocked. It's different in academia. You can be more independent. You can pursue your own emphases and desires and research, teach your classes the way you want within certain parameters. But, and you're not driven by the profit motive. We're talking about for-profit organizations. The market waits for nobody. So you have to make sure that your products and services are competitive at market or change. It drives alignment or ouster. It's a colder environment. There's no tenure in business. Associations are great because they're kind of in the middle, and that's why I've loved working here the past 15 years.
We've loved having you here at AACSB over the past 15 years, and we've loved having you, our global viewing audience, here with us as well in this special episode of eNewsline Live. In February, we'll be hosting Erica James, the Dean at the Gazetta Business School at Emory University. Be sure to visit the eNewsline Live webpage to stay abreast of upcoming broadcasts and to watch interviews with our previous guests as well. We look forward to joining you again in February.